So we have a treat today. Instead of hearing this old, boring voice yet again, I've asked Jim and Michelle Anderson to share with us this morning. They went to a terrific marriage retreat many weeks ago, and it had a huge impact. And they were here the Sunday after, and they came out after church, and I asked them how it was, and they were all aglow. And because they were, I said, well, what would you think about sharing it with the church? And Michelle immediately said, yes. Jim was not as immediate, but I think they both are excited to share this morning. So why don't you come ahead and share with us what you've experienced?
Well, good morning, church family.
Good morning.
I am a man of few words, and while that's not always good in a marriage, I think today it will be embraced with you all, so thank you. I wanted to share with you that we went to a retreat, marriage retreat, and the name of it was WinShape. I wasn't familiar with it, but I looked it up online, and their website looked fantastic. It's located in Rome, Georgia, about 6 hours north of here. It's on a campus of Berry College. Never been there either, but it's a gated community, not like we have here at Florida State. So it has rolling hills. It is nothing but nature at its finest, deer everywhere. It's in the particular place on the campus where they had this WinShape marriage retreat. Actually, it was an old dairy. So I was able to see some old pictures of it when it was actually functional. But they had taken this old dairy and changed everything about it, still had the old barns where the cows and the equipment was located. And that's where they housed us. That's where we had all of our meals. I think they probably depended somewhat on the hospitality school from Berry College with some of that, but it was fantastic. When I looked at the price of what we paid to go to it, and some of the accommodations, I knew that, man, this is a whole lot nicer than what we paid for. I later learned during the retreat that this is the foundation of Chick-fil-A. So I knew then, okay, this is nice and it's done right. The weekend that we chose, the title of it was called Soul Care. Now there are a lot of different weekends, but ours was called Soul Care for Your Marriage. And there were three things that they tried to get us to, or objectives that they tried to get us to improve on throughout the weekend. The first one was something we all know, it's about slowing down to see and hear God. Secondly, they wanted us to work on prioritizing as a couple what they called vital, what's really important and what's not. And then thirdly, they wanted us to talk about understanding our own unique God language. So what I'm going to try to do is give you a few examples from each of those, and hopefully you'll find it helpful. The slowing down part, they used that reading that we heard this morning from the burning bush. And the part that they emphasize on that burning bush was as Moses was walking, is that he noticed the bush and he turned aside. And that's when he turned aside. God noticed that and called to him, and he said, here I am. So I can tell you, for me, I'm too busy. I run too fast. I probably do not notice that burning bush as much as I ought to. So they gave us an exercise to kind of help with that. And this exercise was in the form of, I wasn't familiar with this either, but it's called a labyrinth. To me, it reminded me of the Stations of the Cross, where you move from one station to the next. Well, in a labyrinth, like if you were to visualize our courtyard out here, that's all rocks. And within the rocks is a defined path. They said it's kind of like a pilgrimage or a journey. So what they did was they had each of us go through this path. Well, there were so many of us going through the path that I had to continually keep looking down to make sure that I stayed within this defined path throughout all these many rocks. It was symbolic for me. It was just simply saying, Jim, slow down. You're going too fast in life, because if I don't slow down and watch where I'm stepping, I'm going to get off the path. So And while we were doing this, that we did it as the husbands, and then the wives would watch and pray for us, and then we switched, and the wives would go through and they would pray for us. One unique thing that we did during that walk through that labyrinth was they had us look down on the ground and find a rock. Pick that rock up. Now, that rock was supposed to be something in our lives that is a burden, something that's a challenge to carry, whether it's in your marriage, your family, your work. So the whole time that I walked this path, this journey, which probably took me 10 to 12 minutes, I had to carry that rock. When I got to the end of it, I had to release the rock. And what was in the basket where I was releasing the rock, they asked me to pick up. And that was a little tiny cross that was made from an olive tree from the Holy Land. Just symbolic, but it's one of the exercises that they tried to get us to do to help sink in this idea of slowing down, noticing that burning bush. Because if that burning bush for me is God, I'm not noticing enough of what He's calling out to me to do. So I'm missing something. So that was important to me. Secondly, prioritizing what's vital. Well, they simply had us as an exercise as a couple, try to identify those things in our life, our marriage, that are very important to us, and maybe look at what we're doing that's not necessarily a priority for us. It was something that we take back home, discuss a little bit further, and hopefully identify that and be able to have some practical application going forward. Lastly, they talked about understanding our God language. Well, this was foreign to me as well, but I knew the book, The 5 Love Languages. Well, this was similar to that. And what they had us do in order to be able to understand our God language, they also used the term sacred pathway. What is our sacred pathway? What is that pathway in each of us individually that help us notice God or turn aside, or when we might feel closest to Him or His leading? So they had us do a survey, and within the survey you had to score it, and at the end it would give you an idea of probably where you're on your own natural pathways, sacred pathways, or where your strengths lie in that area, and then also what necessarily doesn't work for you. So for some people it may be in music. For others it might be in nature. For some it may be in solitude, quiet time, prayer, things like that. So it helped us identify those areas so that we could focus on it. So that sacred pathways was enlightening to me because I could see where my score was. And for example, for me, one of the areas was the solitude. And so being quiet when I can silence any distractions and I can be in prayer or just let my mind wander, that's when I felt God's leading the most. But they wanted us to make a practical application of it so that when we identify what that pathway was or were, we embrace them to allow us to love God more and more with all of our heart, mind, and soul, and our neighbors ourselves. They based it upon a book by Gary Thomas, so I ordered the book, Sacred Pathways, so I will delve into it a little bit more. And then Father Eric gave Michelle and I, say, hey, here's a list of questions. Can you try to answer these questions? So those questions are best probably answered by Michelle, so I'm going to let her speak to those.
Good morning. Good morning. Okay, so one of the questions was, what motivated us to go? And as Jimmy said, we had been to a marriage class before at St. Peter's and really enjoyed it. So he was online looking for another class, and he stumbled upon WinShape marriage retreats. And we thought, hey, that sounds fun. Let's, check it out. And even though we felt like our marriage was in a healthy place, we wanted to be sure and keep it there. So another question was the most helpful parts of the retreat. For us, I think being forced to unplug, there are no TVs there. I turned my phone off, The distractions of life were removed, and just something that seemed so simple made such an impact. I mean, I find myself not being on my phone as much now that I'm back, you know, and really being aware of being in the moment. We were able to enjoy the beautiful campus, and the weekend that we went, that Saturday just happened to be the first really cool day of fall, so it was just perfect. Delicious food. I mean, it was not Chick-fil-A, but it was Chick-fil-A influenced. I mean, I was eating cauliflower, and I don't even like cauliflower. That's how good it was. But also, of course, the insightful teachings and how to apply them practically in our marriage, which, like we've said, it includes just slowing down and not overcommitting. The teachings that had the greatest impact, for us, we enjoyed, after they did the teachings, they had questions that, you know, you went right there and you and your spouse discussed for, 10 or 12 minutes. And there were questions that you wouldn't normally slow down and ask your spouse. And so it was really helpful to do that, to have that practice. How is it working now that we are several weeks out? Like Jimmy said, one lesson was to prioritize things within our marriage, and just realizing that every time we say yes to something that requires our time, effort, and energy, that we're saying no to something else. They gave us a bullseye. Jimmy's got the visual. Yeah. And they told us to fill in our priorities so when we make a decision or a commitment to something, we ask ourselves, does it fit anywhere within our target of vital priorities? And for us, it was God, marriage, family. And then under family, I put Jimmy, Michelle, Hannah, Ashlyn, our little immediate family. Those are our priorities.
And this is a magnet for the refrigerator, not for me.
Yeah, so we see it every day. And just remembering that after God, our marriage is our foundation. Not even our girls, our marriage. Everything trickles down from that. So that has to be strong and intact before we can, that can flow out to our girls, our job, our everything else in life. And lastly, it really made us focus more on what does God want for us as a couple. Not just what does God want for me, but what does he want for our marriage. So I didn't really know what to expect when we went, but it exceeded my expectations in every way. I told Father Eric it was a 10 out of 10. I want to go again, to another one. So I couldn't highly recommend it more. So that was our experience.
Thank you very much.